It's a new year, new possibilities, new options, new hope. So it's vitally important that we spin on our heels 180 degrees and take a careful look at what just happened. Was any of it good? I don't know, let's see. "2021 sure was a thing." I don't know how comfortable I am saying it was better than 2020. A lot of what was new in 2020 have become routine, but I don't think that's a good thing. But anyways, normally this is where I would do, well, you go way back, I was doing my top 10 movies of the previous year. Last year I changed that to my favorite pieces of entertainment for the previous year, and I'm going to do that, but I'm also going to do like sort of a quick look back at what the year had for me, because this is my job now, and I've completed now more than the first year of this being my full-time job, and yeah, I kind of want to look back on that a little bit. As far as my own output goes, I'm fairly happy with what I did this year. I will say I'm not thrilled about the fact that most of my most viewed videos from this year were in some way addressing drama that I wish I didn't have to address at all. So things like Noel Clark, John Barrowman, Amber Heard, Joss Whedon, Gina Carano. Yeah, I talked about that way early in this year. That's how long it's been. While I don't intend to stop doing that kind of stuff, I do get annoyed that that's usually some of my more viewed stuff, because a lot of my talking about that is partly just processing my own stuff and hoping that it will help other people process their sense of these things. It's not what I want the channel to be about, but it seems to be what the algorithm wants me to be. I'm not going to lean into it any harder than I already have, but that was sort of my annoyance for the year. Thankfully, my most viewed videos were not among those. The single most viewed video I did was the one talking about the way in which we discuss various creators on this platform coming out. That video did quite well. I think I managed to just catch the wave of interest on the topic. It's funny, sometimes doing topical stuff, it just tanks. Other times I manage to snag the interest, and the algorithm shines its favor upon me briefly. That said, the second most viewed video I did this year was a real pleasant surprise, and that was the video I did on the ethics and implications of body swap stories. Now, that was one that I put a fair amount of work into, but usually the ones that I put that amount of work into, I kind of expect to not do super well. Like the one I did about not really complex villains that are trying to appear complex, or the one that I did as an overview of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I put comparable amounts of work into them. They didn't really go anywhere. I don't know if I just managed to strike a niche that like nobody else was talking about, but that one did surprisingly well and had legs. People kept coming back to that one for a while after it went up. That was a pleasant surprise. By far, the video that I'm most proud of is the one where I spoke with James Stephanie Sterling, Jay Exey, May Leitz, and Jesse Earl of Jesse Gender. And I'm just really happy that they were all willing to speak to me about the experience of coming out on a platform like this. And I'm really happy with how I was able to cut that together. The entire project was a completely different kind of work for me. I'd never really done that kind of editing before, but it came surprisingly naturally, just sort of feeling the flow and the moments to go from one of them to the other and at what points to shift topics. And I'm really proud of that. It did decently. Actually, I'd say slightly better than I thought it might do. But that's the one that I would have most liked to have been the highest viewed one. It isn't, but I would have liked it. My novel was published this year, Dreams of Fire. Yes, there's links to buy down in the description. And I'm really happy with that. And I've been very pleased with the reception. If by any chance you have gotten a copy and you've read it and haven't written a review on, say, Goodreads, I would appreciate it. Could use some more, but I have been very happy from the feedback that I've gotten from those who have written reviews or have reached out to tell me about it. And that was a major accomplishment. I'd been working on that thing for about 19 years. Yeah, roundabout. Yeah. Now, before I get into this, most of these I have reviewed, just not on this channel. I actually do my reviews on the Break Room of Geeks, the subsidiary channel where most of my review material goes. So consider subscribing there if you haven't already. As far as entertainment that I took in this year, it's been a little bit of an odd year because there was lots of stuff that I liked, but it's been surprising to me how much of it hasn't stuck with me as much as I would have expected. For example, I quite liked Raya and the Last Dragon. I quite liked Ghostbusters Afterlife. I liked The Suicide Squad. I liked Luca. I liked Shang-Chi. That Snyder Cut of Justice League came out, and you know what? It wasn't bad. But very few of these things have left a lasting impact, and I've felt very little drive to go and try and seek them out and watch them again. Nor have they occupied much of my brain space since having seen them. Even Spider-Man No Way Home, which is fairly recent and I did like very much, it isn't leaving as much of a lasting impression as I thought it might, given how much I liked it initially. Honestly, as far as movies, or what I'm going to choose to classify as movies, go, there were really only 3 that stuck with me enough that I feel like they're worth really highlighting. And one of them is fairly recent, but I still feel comfortable doing that. Most recently, there's Encanto. Now, if you haven't seen my review, it should be up in the break room of Geeks by now. This is one that, it's funny. When I watched it, I was like, I like that. And then in the process of actually shooting my review for it, and I just sort of talked about what it was doing and how it went about it, I was realizing I actually like this more the more that I talk about it. And even since shooting that review, I like it more the more I think about it, which has happened to me with some Disney movies. That happened to me with Zootopia. That happened to me with Moana. That happened to me with Wreck-It Ralph. Doesn't happen to me with all of them. Some of them I'm just like, yeah, that was fine, and it kind of stays there. But the more I think about what Encanto was doing and the way that it approaches family dynamics and tells a story ultimately about family connections and trying to find the balance between being who you are while also being respectful and honoring those around you, and sort of creating a cautionary tale about the idea of letting the family and what's good for the family become this nebulous thing that is almost separate from the people that are supposed to make up that family. It's interesting because on paper, this had the potential to dip into something that I hate, because I hate stories that basically amount to, you have to forgive your family because they're family. And I hate that. I hate that because that is a narrative used by incredibly toxic people to worm their way back into the lives of family members that they have and likely will continue to hurt. So I have a big problem with that, but that isn't what this is doing. It does have aspects of don't shun your family, but it's not just on the basis of because they're family. It's all centered around this idea of remember that your family isn't an institution, it is people. And keep an eye on those people because maybe they need help, and maybe the things that they're doing that aren't working for you is them trying to help. It's really well done, and the more I think about it, the more I really like it. Another film that I really enjoyed this year, and other reviewers might call this a guilty pleasure. I'm not going to do that because I feel absolutely no guilt about loving this, but I will call this my shallow, no real depth to it pick of the year, and that is Gunpowder Milkshake. I had so much fun with this movie. The action scenes are awesome and inventive. Like, I don't think there's any other movie where you're going to see a panda-shaped suitcase used as a weapon, or where you're going to see these people in such rough shape who can barely even use their limbs still trying to kill each other. It's like, if you've seen Atomic Blonde, how worn out Charlize Theron and the guy she was fighting were at the end of that really long extended fight scene. Imagine a fight scene starting and they're already that worn out. That's in Gunpowder Milkshake. The characters are fun. The actors bring so much sense of personality and history to them just by being there. Are they extremely well sketched out and with deep senses of lore? No, but there's so much personality injected just by the people that they cast that you feel like there's history regardless. I had just pure, unadulterated, joyful fun with this movie. It's to a degree that I wanted the Suicide Squad to be, but as I said, the Suicide Squad, while I did like it, hasn't stuck with me. I do keep thinking about Gunpowder Milkshake, though. I really love it. Now, the thing that I'm going to choose to label a movie that probably left the largest impact on me is Bo Burnham's Inside, which I know hit a lot of people very hard. It hit me on multiple levels. One, because I feel like it connected to what is, I'm not going to say universal, but a very shared experience of what it felt like trying to be productive in the pandemic, especially if you're creative, as well as being a deconstruction of the comedy special in particular. And as someone who loves stand-up comedy, but has become increasingly jaded by it just because it's become very formulaic, seeing somebody break apart the rules of a comedy special as much as this does was exciting, even aside from the fact of how it managed to connect with me on a more emotional and just gut feeling level. It's a heavy viewing. It's not for everybody. And I have even seen some very well-made criticisms about it and the perspective that it has, and those are absolutely totally valid. But I'd be kidding myself if I didn't just admit this landed really hard for me, and I am still listening to some of the songs from it, even now, going into 2022. It hits hard in a way that at times sneaks up on you, and there are moments that are gentle, and then it yanks the rug out from under you, and it just connects with what so much of the past 2 years now have just felt like. Whether the pure logistics line up with your experience or not, that'll vary, but boy, did that capture the mood. Now, when it comes to TV and streaming, you know what, I'll just say it. I think I was a little bit let down by a lot of the stuff that I was excited about. I was really excited about the MCU shows, and while I liked all of them to varying degrees, some less than others, I didn't care for a lot of What If. WandaVision fell apart for me. I really appreciate what Falcon and the Winter Soldier was going for, but it did miss the mark on a few key areas. Loki landed really well for me. And Hawkeye, while probably the least substantial of them, was just fun. I think I hoped for something that was going to hit, at least one of these, to hit me harder. Loki came the closest, but it still didn't quite hit as hard as I'd hoped, as hard as I thought it would. Which, I mean, going into next year, I suppose that recalibrates my expectations of these shows, and maybe that'll put me in a position to better appreciate them in the new year, because I feel like I have a much better understanding of what they're actually going to be versus what I had maybe hoped they would be. None of them were a million miles away from what I wanted, but none of them quite landed there, so a shift in expectations. Maybe I'll be happier next year. As far as other things go, second season of Owl House, love it. I know that hasn't finished. It has to come back from holiday hiatus, but the 10 episodes we've gotten this year, really good. It's a really great, sweet, wonderful show. Terrifically inclusive, great characters. It's just good. Also, this isn't a show that I've talked about, but I've also caught up on Amphibia. I have gotten through the episodes of season 3 that are currently on Disney+. That one, I don't feel as strong a connection to it as The Owl House, but it is a lot of fun, and it scratches a not dissimilar itch. But a bit like with movies, for all the streaming shows that I saw and liked or saw and dropped off of, like Star Wars Bad Batch, which I did 3 episodes on and realized I just didn't really care all that much, there were 3 things that I saw that came out this year that did land really well for me. So the first of those, I suppose, is the obvious one that I should really get out of the way, because it blew up the conversation everywhere, and that's Squid Game. Squid Game, I'd heard so many good things about it, and it was one of those things where I'm like, this isn't going to match the hype. This isn't going to measure up to all the excitement about it and how memeified the visuals have been. Like, this is going to be, it'll be fine, I'm sure, but it's not going to be all that. No, it really was. And again, it's one of those things that the more I think about it, the more I like it. The more I think about how tightly woven the themes and the criticisms of capitalism and what it does to people, and the divide of the rich and the poor, and how that is so tightly woven into everything about this. Like, theming is something that can get away from a project, and especially if it feels like theme is driving the story more than actual narrative or characters are. It can start to feel like a lecture. But if you can find that right balance where the theme is woven across everything you do, but the story still works solidly as just a story about people in circumstances, even without the thematic meanings, that is when you have hit gold. And this is really hard-hitting, beautifully executed gold. Next up, I want to single out It's a Sin, the miniseries by Russell T. Davies. This, as I said in the review, I actually made it the title of the review when I did that. This is what you get when you let a queer creator tell queer stories. Because one of the things that's really frustrating as an LGBTQIA+ person is how many of the films, TV shows, etc., just the pop culture narratives about us are created by straight and cisgender people. And it's not, this is not me gatekeeping saying you're not allowed to tell other people's stories. If you are going to tell other people's stories, you should proceed with caution and know what you're doing. But there's simply an appreciation and a perspective that is almost always lacking somewhere when there isn't a queer person involved in key production elements, be it in the writing, be it in the director's chair, or be it in the cast. And it's really hard to nail down. It's almost intangible. But sometimes, usually, you can just tell this is an outsider's perspective on queerness, on transness, on gayness, whatever it is. You feel that slight distance. You don't feel included. You don't feel like it's really pulling you in. You feel like it's like a zoo. It's like there's a glass sheet. There's something separating it. Like you're close, you can see it clearly, but you're not there with it. It's a Sin brings you in. And you need to understand, I was not going to be automatically inclined to relate to this. I was alive during the time period this is set, but I don't really remember it. I was quite young. I lived in a completely different country. For all the queer experiences I've had in my life, I've never identified as, nor lived particularly close or existed particularly within the gay male culture. I don't have an automatic hook in on this. But I still felt that bringing in, that extending a hand and saying, hey, don't be at a distance. Come on. Let's really get into this. Let's really get into the people. Let's really get into the impact on community that the AIDS epidemic had. Let's understand these people as people. Let's understand these losses as not just spectacle, not just tragedy porn, but as a loss of a human being who you will understand and appreciate and love and be heartbroken when they go. It's wonderfully done. And I've seen some decent movies about this topic. A couple years ago, I was commissioned to watch A Normal Heart, which was also very good. But this is better. This has more time. This has room to breathe. It feels less like an overview and more like an intimate examination. And it's really, really special. But then there's the show that came out of nowhere. I hadn't heard about before it came out. I had absolutely no connection to the stuff in which it's based off of. But I heard a lot of good things. And then I watched Arcane. As somebody who can now actually legitimately call themselves a fantasy writer, buy my book Dreams of Fire, link in the description. Sorry, I can't help it. It's automatic at this point. I can just appreciate the depth of the world in a setting that never stops to lecture me about how the world works. This focuses on characters and the depth and understanding of everything going on and how the conflicts and pasts and world-shaping events that are happening either here or have happened previously are forming everything is done beautifully and naturally. I am not going to knock something like the text crawl in Star Wars or the voiceover opening on Lord of the Rings. Sometimes you need that. But if you can create a world that feels as deep and as expansive as Star Wars, as Middle-earth, without having to ever do that, you have my full and undivided attention, and every character was perfectly fleshed out. None of these were archetypes just filling a narrative purpose. Everybody was a character. No matter how long or briefly they were in this, everybody felt like a person. Which also means this is, while ultimately dealing with bigger stuff than I dealt with in my book, this is in many ways managing to do what I set out to do in my own work and what I say I always like. Small stories in a big world. Now, this does have some of the bigger stories too, but it doesn't let the big story let you ignore the fact that there are smaller stories going on and they matter too. It has a beautiful sense of scale and an understanding of you do not have to be at the top of the pyramid to matter. You can be at the bottom and your story still has meaning and relevance and can hit you in the gut with an emotional impact. You do not have to be a mover and shaker. You do not have to be someone who is going to be written into the history books. You still matter. These characters still matter. I am really glad this is getting a second season. And finally, as a broad category to talk about, you know what I started doing this year? Streaming gaming on Twitch, which has actually made video gaming a normal part of my routine in my life again. That hasn't happened for a long time. Granted, I had to kind of integrate it into my workday to be able to keep a regular schedule of it. But, you know, if it works, it works. Now, I've played a bunch of games this year. Played 2 different Doctor Who games, Lonely Assassins, which may be fairly generic for the genre, but since I hadn't played those sort of explore a phone, unlock more of the phone, realize the mystery going on types games, I thought it was quite well done. Unfortunately, I also tried to play Doctor Who Edge of Reality, which was a nightmare and terrible. This is I cannot turn for useless I cannot see like fucking coffee mugs. Holy designed this. Oh, you. I tried out a cute little visual novel called Paranormal, which I liked until it started getting to the endings, and I played through twice just to see if I had managed to get the worst ending, but then I got a, I suppose, better ending, and it was only slightly better. That game had some issues. Plus, there was stuff that I played that was not on stream. I played a bunch of Dead Cells this year on my Switch. I've started playing Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. Need to get back to that one. But as with the other categories, there are 3 games that I want to highlight. Although, to be fair, 2 of them came out last year. I don't care. I played them this year. I want to talk about them anyways. There is the game that has now become the game that I've sunk the most time into, played more hours of than any other game I've ever played in my life, and that's Hades. Hades has everything that I wanted that Dead Cells didn't give me in terms of being a roguelite. In terms of every nitpick I had about Dead Cells, Hades addressed and did exactly what I wanted. So the gameplay was phenomenal, but the story's also really good. And the way it manages to weave a story into the idea that you are dying and coming back, and like, it's not like, oh, that doesn't count, try again. Like, no, the fact that you died is canonical and impacts the story. The story is how you keep dying while trying to escape the Greek underworld. The characters are fantastic. The art of all these characters is great. The voice acting is wonderful. The whole thing is kind of low-key horny, which, like, that's my vibe. I'm 100% here for that. Love it. And it hits just the right balance so that you have that, oh, just one more run. Just one more. I can do better. I bet you I could beat it with this weapon that I'm normally not that good with if I go again. If I make this modification and I go for these boons instead of the ones I had, I bet you I can do it this time. It really is a hard game to stop playing. and I don't regret any of the time I've sunk into it, which has been a lot. The other game that didn't release this year, released last year, but I absolutely need to talk about is Spiritfarer, another game that I played on my Switch. Spiritfarer is probably the single most emotional experience I've had playing a video game. Its characters and the way that it meditates on death is gorgeous. And I mean that on every level. Visually, it's gorgeous. The music is gorgeous. But just these little things that I didn't realize until it was over. And I started to realize all these things that were hitting me. Like the fact that after characters are gone, whatever house or accommodations you built for them is still on your boat. You don't just get to forget them. You have a reminder there that you see every single time you play. The fact that the way things work and helping these characters be ready to move on is not about getting them happy with it. It's not even necessarily about closure. In fact, it's a lot of times about them coming to terms with the fact that they won't have closure. It feels like one of the most personal, in-depth, honest, and vulnerable pieces of art that is about death that I've ever encountered. And it does it without being dour or gloomy. It's bright and cheerful, and somehow that just makes it hit all the harder. As far as the one game actually released this year that I want to highlight as being one of the best things I played is a game that at time of recording I haven't finished yet, but probably will have finished by the time this video actually goes up. And that's Death's Door. You play a little crow and you wander around trying to recover souls because you basically work for, I don't know, Death Incorporated. It's another game ultimately about death, but plays very different from Spiritfarer, certainly from a mechanical standpoint. This is a little bit Souls-like-ish in terms of needing to master the attack patterns of characters, need to be good at dodging them. When you die, it's going to send you back a ways. But you are always accumulating things that you can cash in to increase your power. And it's got this wonderful Miyazaki-esque visual design and feel to the characters. A lot of the characters are very, very funny, yet it never loses that morbid sense that ultimately what you're doing is going around and killing things. It doesn't let you forget that your mission is not a grand adventure. Your job is to kill things. And some things which very, very much do not want to die and have been going through so much effort to not do that. And you're here to end them. And as whimsical as it can be, it doesn't lose sight of that. And oftentimes with tiny little touches, like the fact that while there are some more ethereal enemies that vanish when you kill them, there are others whose bodies persist and stay on the ground with blood splattered around them for as long as you're in that area. And there were some moments where I was venturing back through and saw the carnage, walked back through it, and realized, oh God, this is a massacre. And I did that. It's not easy to evoke that and have it not break the sense of whimsy and fun that the rest of the game has, but it doesn't break it. It fits together beautifully. Well, there we go. I suppose that ended up being a top 9. Although I suppose technically a top 7 for stuff actually released this year. It's been a strange year. And something tells me 2022 is going to be strange as well. Probably in similar ways, maybe in new ones. But what were your favorite pieces of entertainment that you got to experience this year? Video games, TV, movies, music, whatever it is. Drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. The usual stuff, you know what it is. Likes and shares and subscribes and Patreon support. Links are in the description for things like my book, other social media, link to my Twitch channel, etc., etc. Check that stuff out or don't if you don't want to. If you stuck with me this far, I'm certainly not going to start telling you what to do because, my friends, you are the council. I'm only running the meetings. And what I really want you to remember as we get into a new year is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Happy New Year. None of this would have been possible without my supporters over on Patreon. In particular, I want to thank Robin Powell, Raven McBain, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Robin Moore, and Shayla Gourlay. If you'd like to hear me possibly mispronounce your name, maybe consider looking at the reward tiers over on the Patreon. But either way, don't worry about it too much. Take care of yourself.